The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Commander Sarah Mitchell approached the main gate. She had deliberately chosen to arrive early, wanting to observe the security protocols without the usual fanfare that accompanied her official visits. At 38, Sarah had learned that the most valuable intelligence often came from moments when people didn't know they were being watched. She wore civilian clothes, a simple navy blazer, dark jeans, and comfortable walking shoes. Her shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a modest ponytail, and she carried only a small leather purse. To any casual observer, she looked like countless other visitors who came to the base daily, perhaps a government contractor, a family member, or a civilian employee. This anonymity was exactly what she had hoped for. The gate guard was a young recruit, probably no more than 21 years old. His uniform was crisp and properly pressed, his posture straight and alert. Sarah could see the earnestness in his eyes, the desire to prove himself worthy of his position. She remembered being that young once, that eager to make a good impression and follow every rule to the letter. As she approached the checkpoint, Sarah noticed the recruit's name tag read Martinez. He had the kind of face that belonged in a recruitment poster, clean-shaven, bright-eyed, with the unmistakable bearing of someone who took his duties seriously. When she reached the window, he looked up with a polite but professional expression. "Good morning, ma'am. Purpose of your visit today?" Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her identification. "I have a meeting with Admiral Thompson at 0900 hours. Martinez took her ID and examined it carefully. Sarah watched as his brow furrowed slightly. Her identification was standard military issue, but it contained minimal information about her actual position and clearance level. To the untrained eye, it might appear that she was simply another mid-level officer or administrator. "Ma'am, I don't see you on the visitor log for today," Martinez said, his voice maintaining its respectful tone but carrying a note of uncertainty. "That's because I'm not a visitor," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm military personnel." The young recruit looked at her ID again, then back at her civilian clothes. Sarah could see the confusion building in his expression. She knew what he was thinking. If she were important enough to have unrestricted base access, why wasn't she in uniform? Why wasn't there a military vehicle waiting for her? Why did she arrive alone, on foot, like any ordinary civilian? "Ma'am, with all due respect, I need to verify your clearance level. Base security protocols require that all personnel in civilian clothes provide additional verification for entry, especially for meetings with senior command." Sarah nodded approvingly. "You're following proper procedure, Martinez. That's good." But, instead of producing additional documentation, she simply stood there, waiting. This was a test, though Martinez didn't know it yet. Sarah had spent years studying security protocols across various military installations, and she had seen too many instances where guards became complacent, where the proper procedures were shortened or skipped entirely in the interest of expedience. Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside while I make some calls. There are other people waiting." Sarah glanced behind her and saw a small line forming other early arrivals for various meetings and appointments. She nodded and moved to a designated waiting area near the guard station. From this vantage point, she could observe how Martinez handled the other visitors while he presumably worked to verify her credentials. She watched as he efficiently processed 3 more people. Each interaction was professional and thorough. He checked IDs, consulted his computer screen, made brief phone calls when necessary, and maintained a courteous demeanor throughout. Sarah found herself genuinely impressed with his performance, even as she remained in bureaucratic limbo. After about 10 minutes, Martinez motioned for her to return to the window. His expression had grown more serious, and Sarah noticed a thin sheen of perspiration on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Ma'am, I've been unable to verify your clearance through normal channels. The system shows your ID is valid, but there seems to be some kind of classification restriction on your file. I'm going to need you to contact your command structure and have them call down here directly to authorize your entry." Sarah studied the young man's face. She could see the internal struggle playing out behind his eyes. He wanted to be helpful, but he also knew that base security was not something to take lightly. In a post-9/11 world, even the smallest breach of protocol could have serious consequences. She respected him for sticking to his guns, even though it was clearly causing him stress. "I understand your position, Martinez," she said. "But, I need to ask you something. If I were really someone who shouldn't be here, do you think I would be standing here patiently, following your instructions, and encouraging you to make phone calls that would expose me as a fraud?" Martinez considered this for a moment. "Ma'am, with respect, that's exactly what a skilled infiltrator might do. Act cooperative to lower suspicions while working to find another way in." Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving. "That's very good thinking, son. You're right to be suspicious. But, here's my question: have you considered that someone with truly high-level clearance might have exactly the kind of classification restrictions that are making your computer system act strangely?" The recruit's eyes narrowed slightly. Sarah could see him processing this new angle, trying to work through the logical implications. She decided to give him another piece of the puzzle. "Martinez, let me ask you this. How long have you been stationed at this gate?" "6 weeks, ma'am." "And, in those 6 weeks, how many times have you seen Admiral Thompson personally escort a visitor from the main gate to his office?" Martinez thought for a moment. "Never, ma'am. Senior officers don't usually handle escort duties personally." "Right. So if Admiral Thompson himself were to drive up to this gate in the next 5 minutes to personally escort me to his office, what would that tell you about my actual clearance level?" The recruit's eyes widened slightly as the implications sank in. Sarah could see him running through the scenarios in his mind. She was presenting him with a logical framework that would allow him to maintain his security stance while also preparing him for what was about to happen. Right on cue, a black military sedan with flag officer plates pulled up to the gate. Through the windshield, Sarah could see Admiral Thompson himself behind the wheel, a highly unusual sight. Senior officers typically had drivers or used official motorcades. The fact that he was driving himself, and that he had come to the gate personally, sent a clear message about the importance of whoever he was there to collect. Martinez's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, realization, and, then, something approaching panic. Sarah watched as he quickly moved to salute the approaching vehicle, his earlier confidence evaporating as the full weight of the situation became clear. Admiral Thompson rolled down his window and nodded to the guard. "Good morning, Martinez. I'm here to collect Commander Mitchell." The recruit's salute became even more rigid. "Yes, sir." "Admiral, sir." "She's been waiting in the verification area, sir." Thompson looked over at Sarah, who was still standing calmly in the designated waiting zone. "Commander, I apologize for the delay. I hope Recruit Martinez has been treating you well?" Sarah walked over to the vehicle, her expression neutral. "The recruit has been following proper security protocols, Admiral. Very thoroughly, in fact." She could see Martinez watching this interaction with growing awareness of just how badly he had miscalculated the situation. The young man's face had gone pale, and his hands were trembling slightly as he maintained his salute. Thompson nodded approvingly. "Good to hear. Security is everyone's responsibility." He looked at Martinez directly. "Recruit, you can lower your salute and open the gate." "Yes, sir." As the gate mechanism activated, Sarah climbed into the passenger seat of Thompson's sedan. Through the window, she could see Martinez still standing at rigid attention, his face a mask of professional composure that couldn't quite hide his inner turmoil. "Rough morning for the kid," Thompson observed as they drove through the gate. Sarah looked back through the rear window. Martinez was returning to his post, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing after their departing vehicle. "He did his job," she said finally. "Better than most, actually. He stuck to protocol even when it was difficult. Even when he was clearly under pressure." Thompson glanced at her with interest. "You're not angry about being delayed? About being treated like a security risk?" Sarah considered this question as they drove deeper into the base. The morning sun was climbing higher now, burning off the early fog and revealing the sprawling complex of buildings, training facilities, and operational centers that made up one of the country's most important military installations. Why would I be angry? Martinez doesn't know me. He doesn't know my background or my clearance level. All he knows is what his training taught him, that security protocols exist for a reason, and that following them is more important than being polite or accommodating. That's exactly the kind of thinking we want from our people. Thompson nodded slowly. Most officers would have been furious. They would have demanded immediate entry, name-dropped their connections, threatened to have the kid written up or transferred. Then, they would have failed to understand the real purpose of security protocols, Sarah replied. We don't have those procedures to make life easier for officers. We have them to keep our people and our operations safe. The moment we start making exceptions for convenience or ego, we create vulnerabilities that our enemies can exploit. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, passing familiar landmarks, the enlisted barracks where Sarah had spent her first months in the service, the training grounds where she had pushed herself to physical and mental limits she hadn't known she possessed, the command buildings where she had gradually earned the respect and trust of her superiors. Speaking of security, Thompson said eventually, how much does young Martinez know about why you're here today? Sarah smiled grimly. He knows nothing. And that's exactly how it should stay. The fewer people who know about Operation Neptune's Trident, the better our chances of success. Thompson pulled into a reserved parking space near the main command building. As they walked toward the entrance, Sarah found herself thinking about the recruit at the gate. Martinez had done something that morning that most people, military or civilian, failed to do when faced with authority or pressure. He had stuck to his principles even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant potentially embarrassing a superior officer. That kind of moral courage was rare. It was the kind of quality that made the difference between good soldiers and great ones, between operations that succeeded and operations that failed catastrophically. Sarah made a mental note to remember the young man's name. People like Martinez were exactly the kind of personnel her team needed. As they entered the command building, Sarah's thoughts shifted from the morning's encounter to the serious business that lay ahead. In less than an hour, she would be briefing a room full of senior officers on one of the most sensitive operations the military had undertaken in years. The success or failure of Neptune's Trident would depend on careful planning, flawless execution, and absolute secrecy. But, for just a moment, as they walked through the corridors toward the briefing room, Sarah allowed herself to appreciate the irony of the morning's events. A young recruit had dismissed her at the gate, unaware that he was speaking to the commander of one of the most elite special operations teams in the world. By the end of the day, that same recruit might be reading classified reports of missions that Sarah and her team had completed in places that didn't officially exist, against enemies whose names would never appear in any public record. The thought brought a slight smile to her face as she prepared to enter a world where such ironies were commonplace, where the most important work was often done by people whose contributions would never be acknowledged, and where success was measured not by recognition or glory, but by the simple fact that most Americans could sleep peacefully in their beds, unaware of the threats that had been neutralized before they could reach home. Martinez would return to his gate duty, probably spending the rest of his shift wondering about the woman who had seemed so ordinary but had merited a personal escort from one of the base's most senior officers. He would never know that his careful attention to security protocols had actually earned him a favorable evaluation from one of the military's most respected special operations commanders. And Sarah would carry the memory of his professionalism into the briefing room, a reminder that the strongest defense was often found not in sophisticated technology or overwhelming firepower, but in the simple dedication of individual soldiers who understood that their job mattered, especially when nobody was watching. The briefing room occupied the top floor of the command building, its windows offering a panoramic view of the naval base and the ocean beyond. As Sarah entered, she noted the familiar setup: a large conference table surrounded by high-back leather chairs, multiple screens mounted on the walls, and the subtle but unmistakable presence of electronic countermeasures designed to prevent any unauthorized recording or transmission of the conversations that would take place here. 12 officers were already seated around the table, their collective years of service representing decades of military experience across multiple theaters of operation. Sarah recognized most of them: Admiral Thompson, of course, but also Colonel Martinez from Army Special Operations, Commander Brooks from Naval Intelligence, and several others whose expertise would be crucial for the success of Neptune's Trident. As she took her assigned seat, Sarah was acutely aware that she was the only woman in the room, and, at 38, she was also among the youngest people present. These dynamics had once bothered her, back in the early days of her career when she felt the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of inclusion in such gatherings. Now, she simply accepted them as background noise, no more relevant to her job than the color of the walls or the temperature of the air conditioning. "Gentlemen," Admiral Thompson began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years earning the right to command such meetings, "we're here to discuss Operation Neptune's Trident. Commander Mitchell will be providing the operational overview, but, first, I want to establish the classification level and security parameters for this discussion." Thompson's expression grew serious as he scanned the faces around the table. "Everything we discuss in this room today is classified at the highest levels. The operation we're planning has been authorized directly by the Joint Chiefs, with oversight from the National Security Council. The target represents a clear and present danger to American interests, and the window for action is extremely limited." Sarah studied the faces of her colleagues as Thompson spoke. These were seasoned officers, people who had seen action in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and half a dozen other conflict zones that the public never heard about. They were accustomed to high-stakes operations and classified briefings. But she could see the subtle signs of heightened attention: the way Colonel Martinez leaned forward slightly in his chair, how Commander Brooks's fingers drummed silently on the table, the careful neutrality of expressions that revealed nothing while absorbing everything. "Commander Mitchell," Thompson said, turning to her, "the floor is yours." Sarah stood and moved to the front of the room, where a secure laptop waited connected to the wall-mounted displays. As she logged in with her biometric credentials, she reflected on how different this moment felt from her encounter at the gate just an hour earlier. There, she had been dismissed as an ordinary visitor. Here, she commanded the attention of some of the military's most senior leaders. "Operation Neptune's Trident," she began, her voice clear and confident, "represents the culmination of 18 months of intelligence gathering, planning, and preparation. Our target is a terrorist organization that has been operating under the radar for the past 3 years, building capabilities that pose a direct threat to American civilians and military personnel worldwide." The first slide appeared on the screens, showing a map of the Mediterranean region with several locations marked in red. Sarah used a laser pointer to highlight specific areas as she continued. "The organization calls itself the New Caliphate Brigade. They've been responsible for at least 6 major terrorist incidents in the past year, including the bombing of the embassy in Morocco and the attempted assassination of the French defense minister in Paris. What makes them particularly dangerous is their sophisticated understanding of both conventional and unconventional warfare tactics." Colonel Martinez raised his hand. "Commander, what's their estimated strength? And what kind of external support are they receiving?" Sarah clicked to the next slide, which displayed a detailed organizational chart. Intelligence estimates put their core membership at approximately 200 individuals, with a network of supporters and sympathizers that may extend to several thousand people across North Africa and the Middle East. As for external support, that's where things get complicated. She paused for emphasis, knowing that the next piece of information would capture everyone's full attention. "We have credible intelligence indicating that the brigade has been receiving advanced weapons and training from a state actor. Not just small arms and explosives, but sophisticated communication equipment, night vision gear, and what appears to be classified information about Western military tactics and capabilities." Commander Brooks leaned forward. "Which state actor?" "That," Sarah said, "is still being determined. The intelligence picture is deliberately obscured, but the pattern suggests someone with significant resources and detailed knowledge of American and NATO operations. The weapons they're using include some that are only available to top-tier military units." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah could see the calculation happening behind each officer's eyes. If a state actor was supplying advanced weapons and intelligence to a terrorist organization, the political and military ramifications could extend far beyond a single counter-terrorism operation. Admiral Thompson broke the silence. "Commander, what's the proposed timeline for action?" Sarah clicked to a slide showing a detailed calendar with multiple phases marked in different colors. The operation is planned in 3 phases. Phase 1 involves final intelligence gathering and asset positioning. We have a narrow window of opportunity based on intercepted communications indicating that the brigade's leadership will be gathering for what they're calling a strategic planning conference in 2 weeks. She moved the laser pointer to highlight a location on the Mediterranean coast. The conference is scheduled to take place at a compound in Libya, approximately 40 kilometers from the coast. Our intelligence suggests that virtually the entire senior leadership of the organization will be present, along with representatives from their external supporters. Phase 2 is the direct action component. My team will insert via submarine, establish a forward operating base, and conduct surveillance of the target compound. Once we've confirmed the presence of high-value targets, we'll execute a coordinated assault designed to neutralize the leadership and capture intelligence materials. Colonel Martinez studied the map carefully. What about extraction? That's pretty remote territory, and if things go bad, you'll be a long way from any friendly forces. Sarah had anticipated this question. Phase 3 covers extraction and exploitation of captured intelligence. We'll have multiple contingency plans, including helicopter extraction, ground vehicles, and, if necessary, overland movement to a predetermined pickup point on the coast. She clicked to the next slide, which showed detailed photographs of the target compound taken from satellite imagery and drone surveillance. The compound consists of 6 main buildings surrounded by a perimeter wall. Intelligence indicates approximately 50 to 70 personnel on site at any given time, with that number expected to increase to over 100 during the conference period. Commander Brooks examined the photos with professional interest. What's the civilian population in the area? Are we looking at potential collateral damage issues? The compound is isolated, Sarah replied. The nearest civilian settlement is over 20 kilometers away. However, we've identified what appears to be a small support staff, cooks, maintenance workers, drivers, who are not considered combatants. The rules of engagement will require their protection and, if possible, their removal from the area before any direct action begins. Admiral Thompson nodded approvingly. And, your team composition for this operation? Sarah felt a familiar surge of pride as she prepared to discuss the men and women who would be executing this mission alongside her. I'll be leading a 12-person team drawn from SEAL Team 6 and other special operations units. Each member has been specifically selected for their expertise and experience in similar operations. She clicked to a slide showing a roster of names and specialties, though the personal details were heavily redacted for security purposes. We have specialists in demolitions, communications, medical support, and intelligence gathering. 3 of the team members speak fluent Arabic, and 2 have previous operational experience in Libya specifically. The team has been training together for the past 6 months, she continued. We've conducted full-scale rehearsals of the assault using a mock-up compound built at Camp Pendleton. Every member knows their role, their backup role, and the contingency procedures if the primary plan fails. Colonel Martinez was still studying the satellite imagery. Commander, this looks like a hardened target. What kind of defenses are we expecting? Sarah clicked to a detailed floor plan of the main building. The compound has been significantly reinforced over the past year. The perimeter wall has been heightened and equipped with what appears to be electronic surveillance equipment. The main building has been hardened against small arms fire and, possibly, explosives. More concerning, she continued, is the presence of what our analysts believe are advanced anti-aircraft systems. We've identified at least 2 positions that could house surface-to-air missiles, which would complicate both insertion and extraction. The room grew quiet again as the officers absorbed the full scope of the challenges involved. Sarah knew that each of them was running their own mental calculations, weighing the importance of the mission against the risks involved, considering the political implications of failure, and evaluating the likelihood of success given the parameters she had outlined. There's one more factor we need to discuss, Sarah said, advancing to a slide that showed a series of intercepted communications. Our intelligence suggests that the brigade is planning something significant immediately following their conference. We don't have complete details, but the intercepted traffic references the final phase and maximum impact on American interests.
Admiral Thompson's expression grew grim. Timeline?
Unknown, but based on the urgency of their communications and the fact that they're bringing their entire leadership together, we believe they're planning to execute whatever they're working on within days or weeks of the conference ending. Sarah could see the weight of decision settling on Thompson's shoulders. As the senior officer present, he would ultimately be responsible for recommending whether the operation proceeded or not. The intelligence was compelling, but incomplete. The target was important, but heavily defended. The timeline was urgent, but success was far from guaranteed.
Questions? Sarah asked, scanning the room.
Commander Brooks raised his hand.
What's your assessment of success probability, Commander?
Sarah had been dreading this question, not because she didn't have an answer, but because the answer was more complex than a simple percentage. If everything goes according to plan, if the intelligence is accurate, if the weather cooperates, if the enemy doesn't have capabilities we're not aware of, I'd estimate an 80% chance of mission success with acceptable casualties. She paused, knowing that the next part was crucial. But, in my experience, things rarely go exactly according to plan. Realistically, we should plan for a 60 to 70% chance of complete success, with higher probability of partial success, meaning we neutralize some but not all targets, or we gather some but not all of the intelligence we're seeking. Colonel Martinez leaned back in his chair.
And, worst-case scenario?
Worst case, Sarah said without hesitation, is that we lose the entire team and the enemy learns enough about our capabilities to significantly upgrade their own security. That would set back our counter-terrorism efforts in the region by years and potentially compromise other ongoing operations. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of decision. Sarah knew that each officer in the room had authorized or participated in operations with similar risk profiles, but the unique combination of factors in Neptune's trident, the political sensitivity, the time pressure, the high-value target, and the significant defensive capabilities, made this authorization particularly challenging. Finally, Admiral Thompson spoke.
Commander Mitchell, thank you for a thorough briefing.
I'm going to ask you to step outside while we discuss the authorization decision. Sarah nodded and gathered her materials. As she left the room, she caught a glimpse of the officers settling in for what would clearly be an intense discussion. She knew that her role in the decision was over. She had provided the information, outlined the risks and benefits, and demonstrated her team's readiness.
Now the political and strategic considerations would take precedence.
As she waited in the hallway outside the briefing room, Sarah found her thoughts returning to the young recruit at the gate. Martinez had been faced with a decision that seemed simple on the surface but had complex implications. Follow the rules and potentially embarrass a superior officer, or bend the protocols and risk a security breach. He had chosen to follow his training and stick to his principles, even when it was uncomfortable. Now, inside that briefing room, a group of senior officers were facing a similar decision on a much larger scale. Follow the intelligence and authorize a high-risk operation that could save American lives, or exercise caution and potentially allow a terrorist attack to proceed.
Unlike Martinez, they didn't have clear protocols to guide them.
They had only their experience, their judgment, and their willingness to take responsibility for the consequences of their choice. Sarah had been waiting in the hallway for nearly 2 hours when Admiral Thompson finally emerged from the briefing room. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could read the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightness around his eyes that spoke of difficult decisions and weighty responsibilities.
Commander, he said quietly, walk with me.
They moved through the corridors of the command building in silence, past offices where analysts worked over satellite imagery and intelligence reports, past communication centers where operators maintained contact with American forces deployed around the globe.
Sarah knew better than to ask questions.
When Thompson was ready to share the decision, he would do so in his own time and in his own way.
They stepped outside into the afternoon sun.
The base was busy with the normal rhythm of military life, personnel moving between buildings, vehicles transporting equipment and supplies, training exercises being conducted on distant fields.
It all looked so routine, so peacefully organized.
Most of the people Sarah could see had no idea that a few floors above their heads, decisions were being made that could affect global security and the lives of American service members in ways they would never fully understand.
The operation has been authorized, Thompson said finally.
With modifications.
Sarah felt a complex mix of relief and apprehension.
Relief because she had spent months preparing for this mission and believed deeply in its importance.
Apprehension because with modifications usually meant that political considerations had been allowed to compromise operational effectiveness. What kind of modifications, sir?
Thompson stopped walking and turned to face her.
First, the timeline has been accelerated.
New intelligence suggests that the terrorist conference may include representatives from 3 different terrorist organizations, not just the new Caliphate Brigade. If we can neutralize leadership from multiple groups simultaneously, the strategic impact will be significantly greater.
Sarah nodded. More targets meant more complexity, but also more potential value from the operation. When is the new timeline? 10 days from today. Can your team be ready?
Sarah ran through the logistics in her mind. Her team had been in a state of advanced preparation for weeks, but moving the timeline up by several days would require careful coordination and probably some improvisation.
Yes, sir. We can be ready.
Second modification, Thompson continued, his expression growing more serious. Due to the compressed timeline and the high value of the intelligence we expect to gather, you'll be operating with an expanded support structure. You'll have real-time satellite coverage, dedicated signal intelligence support, and a quick reaction force standing by in case extraction becomes complicated. These additions were actually welcome news. The original plan had called for Sarah's team to operate with minimal support, relying primarily on their own capabilities and training. Having additional assets available would provide important backup options if the situation developed in unexpected ways.
And the third modification? Sarah asked, sensing there was more.
Thompson hesitated for a moment, and Sarah realized that this was the part of the decision that had caused the most debate in the briefing room.
There will be an observer on your team.
Someone from the intelligence community who needs to be present for the exploitation phase of the operation.
Sarah felt her stomach tighten.
Adding personnel to an already carefully balanced team was always problematic, but adding someone who wasn't a trained operator was potentially catastrophic.
Sir, with respect, an untrained observer could compromise the entire mission.
My team has been working together for months. We know each other's capabilities and limitations. Introducing a new element at this stage. The observer is trained, Thompson interrupted. Not to your level, obviously, but they have sufficient background to operate in a hostile environment.
And their presence is non-negotiable.
The intelligence value of this operation is too high to risk losing critical information because we didn't have the right expertise on site to recognize and preserve it.
Sarah knew that further argument would be futile.
The decision had been made at levels far above her pay grade, and for reasons that probably had as much to do with interagency politics as operational necessity. Her job was to adapt and overcome, not to question the wisdom of her superiors.
Understood, sir. When do I meet this observer? Tomorrow morning.
They'll arrive on base tonight and begin integration with your team immediately. I've arranged for an additional 24 hours of joint training to help smooth the integration process. Thompson began walking again, heading toward the Special Operations compound on the far side of the base.
Commander, I want you to understand something.
The people in that briefing room didn't make this decision lightly. We're all aware of the risks, both to your team and to the broader strategic situation. But the intelligence we've gathered suggests that we're looking at a potential terrorist spectacular, something designed to cause mass casualties and maximum psychological impact on the American public. Sarah felt a familiar chill of recognition. She had seen the aftermath of such attacks before: the twisted wreckage of buildings, the families destroyed by random violence, the lasting trauma inflicted on entire communities.
Preventing even one such attack was worth almost any risk.
The window is closing, Thompson continued. If we don't act now, these organizations will disperse back to their various hiding places, and it may be years before we get another opportunity to strike at their leadership structure this comprehensively. They had reached the Special Operations Compound, a cluster of buildings surrounded by additional security measures and populated by some of the most highly trained soldiers in the American military. Sarah could see members of her team conducting equipment checks and reviewing intelligence materials in preparation for the mission ahead.
"I'll leave you to begin your final preparations," Thompson said. "And, Commander? I want you to know that if anyone can pull this off successfully, it's you and your people. You've earned the confidence of everyone who matters, and you have the full support of the command structure." As Thompson departed, Sarah stood for a moment in the afternoon sun, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In 10 days, she would be leading her team into one of the most dangerous and complex operations of her career. The stakes were enormous, not just for her team, but for the broader war on terrorism and the safety of American civilians who would never know how close they had come to experiencing unimaginable tragedy. She walked into the compound's main building, where her team members were gathered around a large table covered with maps, photographs, and technical specifications. These were the people who would trust her with their lives, who would follow her orders even into situations where survival was far from guaranteed. They deserved her absolute best, her most careful planning, her most clear thinking, and her unwavering commitment to bringing them all home safely. "Attention on deck," called out Petty Officer First Class Jackson, her team's senior enlisted member. The conversations around the table ceased immediately as 12 of America's most elite warriors turned to face their commander. "At ease," Sarah said. "We have some updates to discuss."
Over the next hour, she briefed her team on the timeline changes and the addition of the intelligence observer. As she had expected, the news was met with some grumbling and concern, but no outright objections. These were professionals who understood that operational parameters sometimes changed, and that adaptation was part of their job.
"Questions or concerns?" Sarah asked when she had finished explaining the modifications.
Sergeant Williams, the team's explosives specialist, raised his hand.
"Ma'am, with the compressed timeline, are we still planning the full rehearsal sequence?" "Modified rehearsals," Sarah replied. "We'll focus on the most critical aspects: insertion, building clearance, and extraction under fire. The intelligence observer will need to be integrated into these exercises, so we'll have to adjust our procedures accordingly." Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, who served as the team's medic, looked up from the intelligence photographs he had been studying. "Commander, what's the medical support situation? Will we have medevac capabilities if someone gets hit?" Sarah appreciated Rodriguez's directness. Medical support was always a critical concern for special operations teams operating in hostile territory, and the compressed timeline might have affected the availability of such resources. "We'll have a standby medevac team positioned offshore," she said. "But, given the target's location and defensive capabilities, reaching us quickly could be problematic. We'll need to plan for self-sufficiency in terms of medical care for at least the first several hours of the operation." Rodriguez nodded grimly. As a combat medic, he had seen what happened when operators were seriously wounded in remote locations. The ability to provide immediate, sophisticated medical care often meant the difference between life and death, and he would need to ensure that his medical kit was prepared for any eventuality. The discussion continued for another hour, covering everything from communication protocols to ammunition loadouts. Sarah was impressed, as always, by the professionalism and attention to detail demonstrated by her team members. These were people who understood that in high-stakes operations, small oversights could have catastrophic consequences. As the meeting concluded and team members dispersed to begin their individual preparations, Sarah found herself thinking again about the young recruit at the gate. Martinez had been thrust into a situation he hadn't expected, forced to make decisions based on incomplete information and conflicting pressures. In many ways, that was exactly what Sarah and her team were facing: an operation where success would depend not just on careful planning and superior training, but on the ability to make good decisions under pressure when the situation inevitably developed in unexpected ways. That evening, as Sarah reviewed intelligence reports in her quarters, she received a knock on her door.
Opening it, she found a woman in civilian clothes who appeared to be in her early 30s. She had the bearing of someone accustomed to academic environments rather than military ones, but there was an alertness in her eyes that suggested she was more capable than her appearance might indicate.
Commander Mitchell? I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Defense Intelligence Agency.
I understand I'll be joining your team for Operation Neptune's Trident. Sarah stepped aside to allow Vasquez to enter.
Doctor, please come in.
I was hoping to meet you before tomorrow's training session.
Vasquez carried a single overnight bag and a laptop case.
Her civilian clothes were practical rather than fashionable dark slacks, a conservative blouse, comfortable walking shoes. She looked like someone who had spent considerable time thinking about what to pack for a mission she had never trained for.
I want you to know,
Vasquez said as she set down her bags, that I understand the complexity of integrating a non-operator into your team at this stage. I've been briefed on the risks, and I'm committed to following your lead and not becoming a liability. Sarah studied the intelligence officer's face, looking for signs of overconfidence or naivety. What she saw instead was a calm professionalism that reminded her of her own early days in special operations, the determination to prove herself worthy of inclusion in an elite community.
What's your background, Doctor? PhD in Middle Eastern Studies from Georgetown, with a specialty in terrorist organization structures and financing.
I've been with DIA for 8 years, primarily doing analytical work, but I've completed the agency's field operations course and basic combat training. I'm qualified with small arms, and I've done survival training.
Sarah nodded.
The background was impressive from an academic standpoint, but she remained concerned about how Vasquez would perform under the stress of actual combat operations.
Have you been in a shooting situation before?
No, Vasquez admitted.
This will be my first operational deployment.
But I understand what I'm signing up for, and I know that the intelligence we gather from this operation could be critical for preventing future attacks.
The honesty was refreshing. Sarah had worked with too many people who oversold their capabilities or minimized the risks they were accepting.
Vasquez seemed to have a realistic understanding of both her strengths and her limitations.
Doctor, I'm going to be direct with you.
Once we insert into the target area, my primary responsibility is the safety and effectiveness of my team.
If at any point I determine that your presence is compromising our mission or endangering my people, I will make whatever decisions are necessary to protect them. Do you understand that? Vasquez met her gaze steadily. I understand completely.
And I would expect nothing less from an operator of your reputation. Sarah felt some of her concerns ease. The intelligence officer seemed to grasp the realities of the situation without any romantic illusions about the adventure or glory of special operations. That level of realism would serve her well in the challenging days ahead.
All right then, Sarah said. Tomorrow we begin integration training. I suggest you get some rest tonight. The next 10 days are going to be intense.
As Vasquez gathered her belongings and prepared to leave for the guest quarters, Sarah found herself reflecting on the strange way that personnel decisions sometimes worked out. Just as the young recruit Martinez had surprised her with his professionalism and adherence to protocol, Dr. Vasquez might prove to be more of an asset and less of a liability than the initial circumstances suggested. The mission ahead would test not just their training and equipment, but their ability to function as a cohesive unit under extraordinary stress. Sarah had learned over the years that success in such operations often depended less on individual heroism than on the quiet competence of people who understood their roles and executed them professionally, regardless of the circumstances. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a mental note to check on Martinez during the next morning's security briefing. Professional competence deserved recognition, regardless of rank or position. And, in a world where small decisions could have enormous consequences, the military needed more people who understood that doing their job correctly was more important than being liked or accommodated. The submarine USS Hampton cut through the dark Mediterranean waters at a depth of 200 feet, its nuclear propulsion system providing the silent movement that would be crucial for the success of Operation Neptune's Trident. Sarah stood in the cramped briefing compartment, surrounded by her 12 team members and Dr. Vasquez, reviewing the final intelligence updates that had been transmitted from base just hours before their insertion. 10 days of intensive preparation had transformed the team from a group of individual specialists into a coordinated unit that included their intelligence observer. Vasquez had surprised everyone, including Sarah, with her ability to adapt to the physical and mental demands of special operations training. While she would never be mistaken for a seasoned operator, she had demonstrated enough competence to earn the grudging respect of the team members. Final intelligence update, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly in the confined space despite the ambient noise of the submarine systems. Satellite imagery from yesterday confirms increased activity at the target compound. Vehicle count is up 30% from last week, and infrared signatures suggest the presence of approximately 120 personnel. Petty Officer Jackson studied the latest photographs with a practiced eye. That's higher than our original estimates, Commander. Are we looking at additional security, or just more conference attendees? Both, Sarah replied. Communications intercepts suggest that representatives from at least 4 terrorist organizations are now confirmed for the gathering, not the original 3. But there's also evidence of increased defensive preparations, additional sentries, what appears to be crew-served weapons positions, and possible vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices positioned around the compound perimeter. The team absorbed this information with the calm professionalism that came from months of training and years of operational experience. Increased enemy strength meant higher risk, but it also meant potentially greater intelligence value if the mission succeeded. Each operator was running mental calculations about how the changed situation would affect their specific responsibilities. Dr. Vasquez raised her hand tentatively. Commander, do we have any updated information about the conference agenda? Understanding the timing of key meetings could help us prioritize targets during the assault phase. Sarah nodded approvingly. Vasquez was asking the right questions, ones that showed she understood how intelligence and operations intersected. Intercepted communications suggest that the main planning session will take place tomorrow evening in the compound's central building. That's our primary target window. She clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed timeline for the operation. We insert tonight at 2300 hours, establish our observation post by 0200, and conduct surveillance throughout tomorrow. The assault begins at 21:30 tomorrow evening, timed to coincide with the main conference session. Sergeant Williams, the explosives specialist, pointed to several locations on the compound diagram. Ma'am, what's the updated assessment of their anti-aircraft capabilities? With the increased personnel, they might have upgraded their air defenses. Good question, Sarah said. Latest imagery shows what analysts believe are 2 additional surface-to-air missile sites, which confirms our decision to avoid helicopter insertion and stick with submarine deployment. Extraction will remain problematic if we can't neutralize those systems. Chief Rodriguez looked up from his medical supplies checklist. Commander, with the increased enemy strength, we should expect higher casualties. I'm recommending that each team member carry additional medical supplies, even if it means reducing other equipment loads. Sarah considered this suggestion carefully. Equipment loadouts were always a balance between mission requirements and physical limitations. In hostile territory, every pound mattered, but so did the ability to treat wounded team members until medical evacuation became possible. Agreed, she said finally. Everyone drops 1 day's worth of rations and carries additional medical supplies instead. We'll plan for a shorter duration in the target area, with faster extraction once the primary objectives are achieved. The submarine's intercom crackled to life with the voice of the boat's captain. Commander Mitchell, we're approaching the insertion point. Sea state is calm with minimal surface traffic. Visibility conditions are optimal for your operation. Sarah felt the familiar combination of anticipation and focus that preceded every major operation. The months of planning and preparation were about to be tested against the unpredictable reality of combat operations. She looked around at her team members, seeing in their faces the same professional concentration that she knew was reflected in her own. Final equipment checks, she ordered. We deploy in 30 minutes. The next half hour passed quickly as each team member verified their weapons, communication equipment, and specialized gear. Sarah watched Dr. Vasquez going through her own checklist with careful attention to detail. The intelligence officer was carrying a modified submachine gun, basic survival equipment, and a sophisticated electronic device designed to rapidly copy and analyze computer hard drives and data storage systems.
"Time to move," Sarah announced as the submarine captain confirmed their arrival at the insertion point.
The team moved through the submarine's narrow passages to the escape trunk, where their Zodiac inflatable boats waited. Submarine insertions required precise timing and coordination. The boats had to be deployed, loaded with personnel and equipment, and clear of the submarine before enemy detection became likely. Sarah was the last to leave the submarine, taking a final moment to review the mission parameters in her mind. 12 hours from now, if everything went according to plan, they would have neutralized the leadership of multiple terrorist organizations and gathered intelligence that could prevent future attacks against American targets. But between now and then lay a complex operation in hostile territory, where small mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. The Mediterranean night was clear and calm as the two Zodiac boats moved silently toward the Libyan coast. Sarah could see the coastline ahead, a dark line against the star-filled sky. Behind them, the submarine had already disappeared beneath the surface, leaving them alone in enemy waters with only their training and equipment to rely upon. The boats reached the landing point exactly on schedule. The beach was a narrow strip of sand backed by low cliffs that provided concealment from casual observation. Sarah's advance team had identified this location months earlier as offering the best combination of accessibility and defensive cover for their forward operating base. "Security teams out," Sarah whispered into her radio as the boats reached the surf line. Four operators immediately deployed to establish a defensive perimeter while the remaining team members dragged the boats up the beach and began unloading equipment. The landing proceeded flawlessly, each team member executing their assigned tasks with the precision that came from extensive rehearsal. Within 20 minutes, the boats were hidden in a cave formation identified during the planning phase, and the team was moving inland toward their first objective. The terrain between the landing site and the target compound was rocky and sparsely vegetated, providing good concealment for a small unit moving carefully. Sarah's team had studied satellite imagery and topographical maps extensively, identifying the best routes and backup positions for every phase of their movement. Dr. Vasquez moved with the team's main body, staying close to Sarah and the communications specialist. She had proven during training that she could maintain the pace and noise discipline required for covert movement, but Sarah kept a careful eye on her physical condition and stress levels. 2 hours after landing, the team reached their observation post, a cluster of rocks and scrub vegetation that provided clear sightlines to the target compound while remaining far enough away to avoid detection. Sarah used night vision equipment to study the target, comparing what she saw with the intelligence photos they had been studying for weeks. "It's definitely busier than expected," she murmured to Jackson as they observed vehicle movements and sentry positions. "Count at least 8 guards on the perimeter, and there's definitely activity in all the main buildings." Jackson adjusted his own surveillance equipment to get a better view of the compound's eastern side. Movement patterns look pretty routine, though. They're not acting like they expect trouble. This was crucial intelligence. If the terrorist organization had received any warning about the impending operation, their security posture would be significantly different. The fact that their guards appeared to be following normal routines suggested that operational security had been maintained. "Dr. Vasquez," Sarah called softly. "You should take a look at this." The intelligence officer moved forward with her own surveillance equipment, a sophisticated system designed to identify and catalog personnel based on facial recognition and behavioral analysis. If any of the individuals in the compound matched known terrorist profiles, her equipment would flag them for priority targeting. "I'm seeing several matches already," Vasquez whispered after several minutes of observation. "At least 3 individuals from our high-value target list, plus several others that the system is classifying as probable matches." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. The intelligence that had led them to this location was proving accurate, which meant their chances of achieving the mission's primary objectives were good. But she also knew that accurate intelligence was only the first step. They still had to successfully execute the assault and extraction phases of the operation. The team spent the rest of the night and the following day in careful observation of the target compound, documenting patrol patterns, identifying key personnel, and refining their assault plan based on real-time intelligence. By evening, Sarah was confident that her team was as prepared as possible for the complex operation ahead. "All teams, this is actual," she said into her radio as the sun disappeared behind the western horizon.
"Execute in 60 minutes.
Final equipment checks and move to assault positions."
The next hour passed with methodical precision as each element of the assault team moved into position around the compound's perimeter.
Sarah's plan called for a coordinated attack from 3 directions simultaneously, designed to overwhelm the defenders and prevent organized resistance.
"All teams, report status," Sarah commanded as the countdown reached its final minutes.
Alpha team in position.
Bravo team ready.
Charlie team set.
Support team standing by. Sarah took a deep breath and felt the familiar calm that preceded action. Execute, execute, execute.
The assault began with the near-simultaneous detonation of explosive charges at 3 points along the compound's perimeter wall. The night lit up with brilliant flashes as the breaching charges created man-sized holes in the barriers that had protected the terrorist gathering.
Sarah's Alpha team moved through their breach point with practiced efficiency, each operator covering assigned sectors as they advanced toward the main building.
The element of surprise was complete. The first shots fired came from her team's weapons as they engaged startled sentries who were still trying to understand what was happening. Building 1 clear, Jackson's voice came through her earpiece as his element secured the compound's communications center. Building 2 secured, Rodriguez reported from the residential quarters where many of the conference attendees were staying. The main assault building proved more challenging.
As Sarah's team approached, they encountered organized resistance from defenders who had managed to reach prepared positions.
The sound of automatic weapons fire filled the night air as both sides engaged in a running firefight through the building's corridors and rooms. "Contact front," Williams called out as his breaching team encountered a barricaded doorway. Multiple hostiles in the main conference room. This was the moment the entire operation had been building toward. Behind the barricaded door were the terrorist leaders whose deaths or capture would significantly degrade several organizations' operational capabilities. But, between the assault team and their objectives were unknown numbers of desperate men willing to fight to the death rather than surrender. "Vasquez, stay with the support team," Sarah ordered as she prepared to join the final assault. "Rodriguez, be ready for casualties."
The final phase of the building clearance was brutal and intense.
Sarah's team used explosive charges to breach the barricaded conference room, then fought their way through a maze of overturned furniture and improvised defensive positions. The terrorists were well armed and determined, but they lacked the training and coordination of Sarah's operators. When the gunfire finally stopped, 8 high-value targets lay dead in the conference room, along with documents and electronic devices that Dr. Vasquez immediately began processing with her specialized equipment. The intelligence hall was everything they had hoped for: detailed organizational charts, financial records, and communications that would provide crucial insights into multiple terrorist networks.
Extraction in 15 minutes, Sarah announced as her team began the process of withdrawing from the compound.
They had achieved their primary objectives, but they were still deep in hostile territory with limited time before enemy reinforcements would arrive. The extraction proceeded as smoothly as the assault, with the team moving in coordinated bounds back toward their coastal pickup point. Behind them, the compound burned from the explosive charges that had been set to deny the sight to any follow-up investigators. As they reached the beach where their submarine waited, Sarah felt the mixture of relief and professional satisfaction that came with a successful mission. Her team had performed flawlessly. Dr. Vasquez had proven her worth under fire, and the intelligence they had gathered would save American lives by preventing future terrorist attacks. But, even as she prepared for extraction, Sarah was already thinking about the next mission, the next threat, and the constant vigilance required to protect American interests around the world. The war on terror was far from over, and there would always be another compound, another group of terrorists, another opportunity to prevent tragedy through the application of carefully planned and expertly executed special operations. 3 weeks after Operation Neptune's Trident, Sarah found herself once again approaching the main gate of the naval base. This time, however, she wore her full dress uniform, complete with the ribbons and decorations that marked her years of distinguished service. The stars on her collar gleamed in the morning sunlight, a promotion that had been expedited through the chain of command in recognition of the operation's unprecedented success. The intelligence gathered by Dr. Vasquez had already led to the disruption of planned terrorist attacks in 3 different countries, the seizure of millions of dollars in terrorist financing, and the arrest of dozens of operatives across Europe and North Africa. The operation's impact would continue to reverberate through terrorist networks for years to come, significantly degrading their operational capabilities and saving countless innocent lives. As Sarah approached the gate, she recognized the familiar figure of recruit Martinez at his post. 3 weeks had done nothing to diminish his professional bearing or attention to detail. He stood straight and alert, his uniform crisp and his demeanor serious as he processed the morning's stream of visitors and personnel. When Sarah reached the checkpoint window, Martinez looked up with the same polite professionalism she remembered from their first encounter. For a moment, his expression remained neutral as he took in her uniform and insignia. Then, recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by what looked like barely controlled panic. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carefully controlled but carrying an undertone of nervous energy. "Good morning, ma'am." Sarah smiled slightly as she handed over her identification. "Good morning, Martinez. How are you settling into your assignment here?" "Very well, ma'am," Martinez replied, handling her ID with extra care while sneaking glances at the additional stars that now adorned her collar. "Ma'am, about our previous encounter." "What about it?" Sarah asked, her tone genuinely curious. Martinez swallowed visibly. "Ma'am, I need to apologize for not recognizing your position and clearance level. I followed protocol, but I should have been more aware of." Sarah held up a hand to stop him. "Recruit Martinez, let me ask you something. What exactly do you think you should apologize for?" The young man looked confused by the question. "Ma'am, I delayed a senior officer unnecessarily. I questioned your credentials when I should have recognized your authority. I caused Admiral Thompson to have to personally escort you from the gate." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And do you think that Admiral Thompson was upset about having to escort me?" Martinez considered this carefully. I'm not sure, ma'am. He didn't seem upset at the time." "Martinez," Sarah said, her voice taking on the tone she used when teaching important lessons to junior personnel, "let me tell you what I told Admiral Thompson about our encounter. I told him that you followed proper security protocols even when it was difficult. I told him that you stuck to your training instead of taking shortcuts for convenience. I told him that the military needs more personnel who understand that security procedures exist for a reason." The recruit's expression shifted from anxiety to confusion. "Ma'am?" Sarah leaned forward slightly, making sure she had his complete attention. "The morning I arrived at this gate, I was conducting an informal security assessment. I wanted to see how our personnel would handle an unusual situation, someone with legitimate credentials but minimal documentation. You passed that test perfectly." Martinez's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "You were testing the security procedures?" "Not intentionally," Sarah admitted. "But your response told me everything I needed to know about your character and your commitment to your duties." "Do you know what Admiral Thompson did after our meeting that day?" "No, ma'am." Sarah smiled. "He had a note placed in your personnel file commending you for exemplary attention to security protocols. That commendation, along with similar observations from your other supervisors, is why you're being transferred to a new assignment next week." The confusion on Martinez's face deepened. "A transfer, ma'am? Have I done something wrong?" "Quite the opposite," Sarah replied. "You're being assigned to the security detail for special operations personnel. It's a significant step up in responsibility and clearance level. The position requires someone who understands that following proper procedures is more important than being accommodating to people who claim to have authority." Martinez straightened unconsciously, his military bearing becoming even more pronounced. "Ma'am, I'm honored by the opportunity." "You've earned it," Sarah said. "But I want you to remember something important. The qualities that made you suitable for this new position are the same ones you demonstrated that morning when you didn't know who I was. Don't let increased rank or responsibility change your commitment to doing things correctly, even when it's difficult. Sarah paused as she saw Admiral Thompson's staff car approaching the gate. She had a meeting scheduled to discuss the intelligence exploitation from Neptune's Trident and the planning for follow-up operations. But, first, she wanted to complete an important piece of unfinished business.
Martinez, she said, I want you to meet someone.
Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from the passenger side of Thompson's vehicle, now wearing the uniform of a newly commissioned Navy lieutenant. Her integration with Sarah's team during the operation had been so successful that she had requested transfer from the Defense Intelligence Agency to Naval Special Warfare, where her unique combination of analytical skills and operational experience would be invaluable.
Lieutenant Vasquez, Sarah said as the intelligence officer approached the gate, I'd like you to meet Petty Officer Martinez. He'll be joining your new unit as part of the security team.
Vasquez extended her hand to Martinez with a warm smile.
Petty Officer, I've heard good things about your work here. I look forward to working with you. Martinez shook her hand with obvious pride at the recognition. Thank you, ma'am. I'm excited about the new assignment.
As Admiral Thompson joined them at the gate, Sarah reflected on the strange way that events had connected these three people. A routine security check had revealed Martinez's character and led to his advancement. The compressed timeline of Neptune's Trident had forced Vasquez to develop operational skills that transformed her career. And Sarah's informal assessment of base security had provided her with additional insight into the importance of individual character in maintaining institutional standards. Commander Mitchell, Thompson said, using her old rank out of habit before correcting himself.
I apologize, Admiral Mitchell. Are you ready for the briefing?
Sarah nodded, but, before leaving, she turned back to Martinez.
Petty Officer, one final piece of advice. In your new position, you're going to encounter situations where the right decision isn't obvious from the manual. When that happens, remember what you did that morning when you didn't know who I was.
You followed your training, you stuck to your principles, and you put security above convenience.
Those instincts will serve you well in special operations.
As they drove toward the command building, Thompson glanced at Sarah with interest.
You've taken quite an interest in young Martinez. Any particular reason?
Sarah considered the question as they passed the familiar landmarks of the base. Admiral, Operation Neptune's Trident succeeded because every person involved understood their role and executed it professionally.
Dr. Vasquez adapted to an environment she'd never experienced before.
My team performed a complex mission flawlessly. Even the submarine crew contributed to the success through their expertise and precision. She paused, organizing her thoughts. But success in special operations ultimately comes down to character, the willingness to do the right thing even when it's difficult, even when no one is watching, even when it would be easier to cut corners or make exceptions. Martinez demonstrated that kind of character in a routine situation. People with that foundation can be trained for any mission.
Thompson nodded approvingly. And, Lieutenant Vasquez? What's your assessment of her transition to operational duties? Outstanding, Sarah replied without hesitation. She's requested assignment to the intelligence exploitation team for our next operation.
Her combination of analytical skills and operational experience is exactly what we need for the increasingly complex threat environment we're facing.
The command building came into view, its familiar facade now housing additional security measures implemented since Neptune's Trident.
The success of the operation had elevated the base's status as a special operations hub, bringing increased resources but also increased scrutiny and responsibility. As they entered the building, Sarah was struck by how different this arrival felt from her anonymous visit 3 weeks earlier. Then, she had been preparing for a mission whose outcome was uncertain. Now, she was planning follow-up operations based on the intelligence windfall that Neptune's Trident had produced. The briefing room was filled with many of the same officers who had authorized the original operation, but the mood was markedly different. Success had a way of changing institutional dynamics, and Sarah could see the confidence and satisfaction in the faces around the table.
Admiral Mitchell, Thompson said formally as they took their seats, would you please provide an update on the exploitation of intelligence materials recovered during Neptune's Trident?
Sarah stood and moved to the front of the room, where displays showed organizational charts, financial networks, and operational timelines derived from the documents and electronic devices her team had captured. The intelligence picture that had emerged was more comprehensive than anyone had dared hope. The materials recovered by Lieutenant Vasquez and her team have provided unprecedented insight into terrorist financing, recruitment, and operational planning across multiple organizations, she began. We now have detailed knowledge of planned attacks, funding sources, and communication networks that extends far beyond the original target set. She clicked to the first slide, showing a map of Europe and North Africa with dozens of locations marked in red. This intelligence has already led to 57 arrests, the seizure of over $12 million in terrorist assets, and the disruption of planned attacks in London, Paris, and Rome. Colonel Martinez, who had been promoted since the original briefing, leaned forward with interest.
Admiral, what's the assessment of future threat levels? Have we significantly degraded their capabilities?
Sarah advanced to a slide showing comparative threat assessments before and after the operation. The immediate threat has been reduced by approximately 60% in the European theater.
However, we're seeing signs that surviving elements of these organizations are attempting to restructure and rebuild. The window for follow-up operations is limited.
Commander Brooks, now wearing the insignia of a captain, studied the intelligence summaries.
What kind of follow-up operations are you recommending?
Targeted strikes against the reconstitution efforts, Sarah replied. The intelligence we gathered has given us insight into backup leadership structures and fallback positions.
If we act quickly, we can prevent these organizations from rebuilding their operational capabilities.
The discussion that followed was detailed and comprehensive, covering everything from resource allocation to political considerations. Sarah was impressed by the level of sophistication in the planning process, which reflected lessons learned from Neptune's Trident about the importance of interagency coordination and comprehensive intelligence exploitation. As the briefing concluded, Thompson approached Sarah with a document marked with the highest classification levels.
Admiral, you should review this when you have a moment. It's the recommendation for your next assignment. Sarah accepted the document with curiosity.
Her promotion had come with the understanding that she would be given greater responsibility for strategic planning and coordination of special operations across multiple theaters.
A joint task force, Thompson explained.
Coordinating special operations activities across 3 geographic commands, with particular focus on counterterrorism and intelligence gathering. It's the kind of position that comes available once in a career, and your success with Neptune's Trident has made you the obvious choice.
Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions as she considered the opportunity.
Greater responsibility meant the chance to have broader impact on national security, but it also meant less direct involvement in field operations. She would be planning and coordinating missions rather than leading them personally.
I'm honored by the opportunity, she said finally. When would the assignment begin?
60 days, Thompson replied.
Enough time to complete the follow-up operations from Neptune's Trident and ensure a smooth transition for your current team.
As they left the briefing room, Sarah found herself thinking about the full circle of events that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she had been an unknown commander preparing for a dangerous mission. Now, she was being offered one of the most prestigious and influential positions in the special operations community. But what struck her most was not the recognition or advancement, but the reminder that success in any complex endeavor depended on the character and competence of individuals at every level. From Martinez's dedication to proper procedure at the gate, to Vasquez's willingness to step outside her comfort zone, to her team's flawless execution under pressure, the mission had succeeded because everyone involved had understood the importance of their individual contributions to the larger goal. As she prepared to take on new responsibilities and face new challenges, Sarah carried with her the lessons learned from Operation Neptune's Trident, that leadership meant recognizing and developing talent wherever it was found, that success required careful preparation combined with the ability to adapt when circumstances changed, and that the most important battles were often won by people whose contributions would never be publicly acknowledged. The young recruit who had dismissed her at the gate had unknowingly demonstrated the kind of character that made all other achievements possible. In recognizing and developing that character, Sarah was investing in the future security of the nation and the continued success of the men and women who would carry forward the mission of protecting American interests around the world. Outside the command building, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the naval base, marking the end of another day in the ongoing struggle against those who would do harm to innocent people. But, for Sarah, it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in her career, one that would allow her to influence and guide the next generation of special operations personnel who would face whatever challenges the future might bring.